Lover's Moon, a novel by Mark Leslie and Julie Strauss. Read by the authors.
Chapter 4. Gail. GTG. I sent the message and then tried to arrange my face into a serious businesswoman mask. Michael Andrews was coming to me for professional help. I glanced down to shut off my phone and saw that it was flooded with messages. GTG? What does that mean? Gail, what is GTG? Why aren't you replying anymore? I don't know what to do about the bees. I typed out a quick reply. GTG equals gotta go. In a meeting. We'll call you in an hour. Isabeau was not going to be happy with that reply, but I didn't have any options. Michael had already reached my table while I was texting her. He startled me when I looked up. How did he move that fast?
Gail?
He asked with a smile. Holy hell! I swallowed hard. This is a business meeting. You must be Michael. Nice to meet you. He sat down across from me and I snapped my phone off and dropped it in my purse. He needed my expertise. No need to act like a teenager who'd just met the lead singer of a boy band just because he was good looking. I remind myself again. This was a business meeting. That sentence kept rolling through my head like a mantra, except it wasn't registering. Nothing much was registering, except that I was sitting across from this hunk of a human, and I couldn't even remember why.
I appreciate you meeting on such short notice. I'm in a bit of a bind. I suppose Anne already told you the whole story?
Not much. Some of it. You need my help for a book you're writing.
Sort of,
he replied. And then he did that thing that men do when they want to kill you right on the spot. While he talked, he took off his jacket, draped it over his seat, unbuttoned his cuffs, and rolled his sleeves up to the elbows. Right there at the Starbucks table, like an assassin. How was I supposed to concentrate? He had forearms like Popeye, for Christ's sake. I considered calling the police.
Do you think you can help me?
I blinked at him. I hadn't heard a word he'd said. Yes, I replied, because obviously that's what you do when an attractive assassin asks you for professional help. You say yes, even if you have absolutely no clue what they need.
All of it?
He asked.
Even back to the 1600s?
I stared for a moment. What's in the 1600s? I asked stupidly. He sighed and his dark eyebrows furrowed. His appreciation of my expertise was waning, undoubtedly because I was behaving like a total moron. I took a deep breath and shook my head a little bit. My ability to get distracted by men's forearms notwithstanding, I had a job to do. It's loud in here, I said. I missed that last part. Tell me again what you need?
Well, I'm mostly looking for some more esoteric understanding about occultism in relation to Christianity through the years. In particular, how religious leaders have weaponized it against non-dominant cultures for their own gain, and what ties the fictional text of the Necronomicon may play a role in any of this. I have a few books.
At this point, he whipped out his own phone and held up a list of book titles for me to examine. He had a lot of the basic texts on mysticism, with a few outliers sprinkled in there for good measure. He'd probably just gone down the line on the Amazon bestseller list. Oh, you've got a great start, I said. These are the standards. You'll learn pretty much everything you need to know with these.
Well, obviously not, or I wouldn't be asking for help.
Well, what more do you need?
Every one of these books tells me this event happened this year and this person wrote a book about it. I'm more interested in the development of the beliefs and the tension of the dominant society of the time.
Understand the people and you'll understand the stories. He nodded, just slightly, and the left corner of his mouth went up. Pagan gods above, I do love a man who knows how to wield a smirk.
That's right,
he said thoughtfully.
That's right. I am a writer of stories.
I felt my body temperature go up a solid 5 degrees and shifted in my seat. Leather pants had seemed like a great idea when I left the house, but I didn't know I'd be having a conversation with a man whose eyes actually smoldered. I had the strangest sensation that he could tell I was sweating because he narrowed his eyes just a bit and almost seemed to be enjoying my discomfort. You're not what I expected a writer to look like, I blurted out. His smirk deepened, and he sat back and crossed his legs at the ankles. Jeez, what was this guy? 8 feet, 9 feet tall? His legs practically reached across Fifth Avenue.
You're not what I expect an occult shop owner to look like.
Well, touché. One backhanded compliment deserved another. I should probably redirect the conversation before he decided to tell me that one time in college he dated a girl who looked just like Stevie Nicks. Before I could speak, he stood from the table.
I need a coffee. What can I get you?
Nothing. You go first. I'll go get mine next. I don't want to lose our table. This is prime real estate. He walked over to the counter, and I had to physically restrain myself from turning in my seat to watch him go. I reached for my phone as discreetly as I could. Isabeau had blown up my phone in the 10 minutes since I'd last texted her. What meeting? Is it animal control? I don't know what to do with this guy. He's asking about the lease. Honey is dripping out of the electrical sockets. Gail, you need to talk to this guy. Gail! Michael returned to the table just as I stood up and put my phone to my ear. Excuse me for 1 minute, I said to him with the most unconcerned smile I could manage. My business partner needs my help with a bee situation. He shrugged and sat down. I moved to get into the huge line that had accumulated at the coffee counter. What is going on? I asked when Isabeau picked up the phone. To get to the beehive, they have to rip out a wall. The estimate is a huge, scary number, Gail. Plus, they want to spray a bunch of pesticides in there. No pesticides, I say firmly. That is non-negotiable. Where is Len? Our reptilian landlord was supposed to be handling all of this. I rubbed the space between my eyebrows, trying to ward off a quickly approaching cluster headache. He's here, fighting me about the cost, blaming us for the bees, as if we have control over nature. Deep breath, Gail. Well, that's obviously nonsense. We have insurance. Len has insurance. They don't need to rip out walls. I'm sure someone can get to it through the attic. We will fight this. Yes, Gail, I understand that in the long run we'll be okay, but that's going to take time, and we've got to figure out how to replace the damaged merchandise or we won't have customers. Well, the good news is I'm across town doing some consulting work for this guy, this writer. His agent called me this morning and offered me $5,000 for some research help. Evidently, he's pretty big time. I was just thinking I should leave, but I'll stay. We need this money. A writer? She said. Is he weird? No, I say, perhaps a bit too loudly. Why would you think that? I don't know, she replied. I could imagine her nonchalant shrug, her bird-like shoulders pushing the black spirals of her hair out of the way. In the movies, writers always look a little hungover. Why were you just about to leave? This one doesn't look hungover. I glanced over at Michael. He didn't have his phone out. He hadn't grabbed a book or a magazine. He didn't have a laptop or a notebook. He was just sitting there sipping his coffee, like a psychopath. He's what? Isabeau prompted. Michael had been gazing at the couple at the table next to ours, but they stood up to leave, so his gaze shifted around the room. I watched his eyes travel from person to person, lingering every now and then, tilting his head while he observed. Occasionally he sipped his coffee, but he never stopped watching. There was something endearing about his curiosity. He's nice, I finally responded. He seems like a really nice guy. There was a pause. How tall is he? Isabeau. Oh, hell no. Isabeau! I said hell no. Do you hear me, Gail? Absolutely hell to the damn no. It's not what you think. What is it then? She challenged. I am working. Then tell me what he looks like. I sighed again. Nothing. He's just a regular guy. She paused before she replied, and when she spoke, her voice was pitched, scary low. I'm going to say this once, Gail Summers. Once. You get the hell out of that place right this second. I can't just leave. This is supposed to be a business consultation. And you are supposed to be celibate for a year. Do you remember that? Do you remember crying on my couch? Do you remember setting all of Jonathan's clothes on fire in Tompkins Square Park just yesterday afternoon? And that fine you got from the fire department? Do you remember how you vowed to do all that self-improvement bullshit? I went to a yoga class this morning, I said, rather vaguely. Then I addressed the barista who was waiting to take my order. 1 venti Pike Place, please. You need to walk out of that room, Isabeau replied. Tell him you can't help him and he needs to find someone else. Tell him to make up occult stuff because that's what writers do. They lie. That is literally their job, even the tall ones. Or just tell him to go to one of the million other occult shop owners in New York. I handed over some cash, not at all sure that my credit card would be accepted. But I'm the only one with a beehive in her store and an intense need for a revenge fuck. I knew she'd flip out the second I said that last part, but sometimes I can't help teasing Isabeau. 1 year of celibacy, she sputtered. You promised me. How else will you learn whatever you're supposed to be learning this year? I wanted to laugh, but I also needed to extricate myself from this conversation. Any minute now, Michael would decide I was a flake and walk out of this cafe. Besides the fact that I wanted to stare into his Marlon Brando eyes for a while longer, I really needed that money. Isabeau, listen to me. Take a breath. This is a whole new Gail. I took this job because we need the cash. I can still notice good-looking men even when I'm celibate. I am at a coffee/work appointment. That's it. Now, if there's nothing else, I'm going back to my meeting. Silence met me from the other end of the phone. I waited for a few beats. She didn't answer, but I knew she was still there. I could hear her breathing and doing that tap-tappy thing she did with her fingernails when she was pissed. I said, taking the coffee they'd poured me over to the cream and sugar table. I normally drank it black, but I needed to delay getting back to Michael for 1 more minute. This here, what you're doing, this is the divine feminine in action. Women looking out for each other, using their power to uplift and support one another, channeling their rage for good. I paused, trying to think of more keywords that would calm her down. Bringing up feminine spirituality was always a good idea when Isabeau was fed up with me. I receive your positive energy, and I am grateful for you, okay? Now, let me get distracted by this handsome, but off-limits to me, hunk of burning manhood. I promise all of my clothes will remain on my body, okay? Finally, I heard a long sigh. I don't know, G. I'm just not sure if I can trust you, she said. Exactly how tall is he? I bit back a laugh. One thing about Isabeau, she took her job as my best friend seriously. At the very least, I was in for a long lecture. At worst, she would show up to this cafe with a chastity belt for me and some large, pointy crystals, which she would fling into Michael's unusually handsome head. He's not that tall, and I love you more than oxygen. I'll be back at the shop in a couple of hours. Deal? Michael's coffee was empty when I got back to the table, and I apologized for disappearing for so long.
It's not a problem. Watching people is an important part of my job.
Is that where you get ideas for your books?
Sometimes,
he said, with a slightly abashed shrug.
I like to eavesdrop. That was an intense conversation you were having.
You could hear that? This strange and sexy writer must have the ears of a fruit bat. I hope he hadn't caught the word celibate.
Body language, mostly. An argument?
I sighed. Our store is infested with bees. I corrected myself when I saw the look of alarm on his face. Well, not infested, not exactly. We had noticed a few bees milling around, and then this morning there was honey dripping out of the ceiling fixtures. Even though his face looked placid, I had the strangest sensation that he knew I wasn't telling the whole truth about my conversation. It's not as unusual as you might think, I continued, even though I realized how absolutely bananas I sounded. Beehives can be huge. Something happened to damage their hive. A rodent of some sort, most likely. And the hive broke, and the honey is seeping out.
Out of the walls?
He looked confused. Well, it drips down the walls and pools on the ground. It smells delicious.
Can you eat it?
I shrugged. I mean, there are probably a lot of toxins in the building. But then again, supposedly honey's antibacterial.
I think I'd try it,
he said.
Imagine you could just wipe your toast along the wall every morning and breakfast is ready.
I laughed out loud at this, but the mention of food got my stomach growling. Do you want to go next door and get some dinner? We can talk there. I'm a lot more coherent when I get a little pasta in me." He didn't answer right away. He assessed me with his head cocked to one side. The way he looked at me made me feel exposed, and I noticed my hand nervously checking the buttons on my shirt. The smirk returned, and my heart rate sped up again. The problem was, new Gail did not make out with tall strangers. New Gail meditated and got acupuncture and sent good vibes to the world. New Gail did not have time for people as common as men because she was too busy being spiritually divine and astrally calm and wonderfully single and sacredly celibate.
"That sounds great,"
he said.
"I'm starving."
Old Gail would have suggested we grab a cab back to her place and have had him half undressed before making it up the stairs.
You've been listening to Lover's Moon, a paranormal romantic comedy by Mark Leslie and Julie Strauss. Read by the authors. Lover's Moon is book 5 in the Canadian Werewolf Series, published by Stark Publishing and available in print, ebook, and audiobook. The music used in this production, Waltz Primordial by Kevin MacLeod featuring Alexander Nakarada, was licensed via Incomptech.com and is copyrighted by Kevin MacLeod.